This is the Eli Media Network, and again, this is the Dr. Baruch Show. And today we've got a special interview. We've got a guest who's flying in via the internet, via Skype, and he's going to be talking to us about himself and about the work that he has done and about the great benefits of some of the changes and the inspiration that he gives his clientele, as well as he's going to talk about what he's going to be doing going forward. So it's going to be a good show. Put on your seatbelts, get ready to go for a nice ride, and make sure you got your pen and pad. We'll give you a minute, to get your pen and pad so that you can begin to take notes. Sure, these recordings are on the net. You'll be able to pick it up on the net at our YouTube page, which is eLife Media Group. But on top of that, you want to get fresh while it's coming live off the wire. So without further ado, I would like to bring on for you a brother who I met maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. But somebody who is a teacher, somebody who goes in and is not afraid to reveal to us the truth and tell us what the deal is about what's going on with our health. Why are so many of us sick? And the interesting phenomenon that exists in sickness across America and sickness across Black America. Because there's a difference. There's a different dynamic. There's a different set of variables. There's a different thought process. There's a different diet. There's a different healthcare system. There's different access. There's a different self-worth. There's a whole slew of things that are different. So we're going to be talking about those things for the next couple of hours as we dive in an effort to get you to be in a stronger position to be able to get this right. So without further ado, let us bring up my brother and one who is in the weeds right next to me, fighting to help us get this right, Brother Curtis Duncan. Good morning, Brother Curtis. How are you today?
I'm doing quite well. You such a show.
Okay. I can hear you, Brother Curtis, but I'm getting feedback that we weren't getting before. I'm not sure whether there's any change. Is there a fan blowing by any chance?
Yeah, there's a fan blowing. Sound better now?
Yeah, it sounds better now.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so who is Curtis Duncan? Tell us, who are you?
So, it's a regular guy from the street.
Come on now.
I'm Richie from Philadelphia.
Okay.
And I currently reside in Atlanta, Georgia area. I am a holistic health researcher. I spent close to about the past 12 years doing independent health research in the topics of vaccines, the emotional freedom technique, genetically modified foods, eugenics, gender bending chemicals or endocrine disruptors. Also done my research into the whole pharmaceutical cartel and research into African American health and why so many blacks, particularly black women, struggle with so many ailments. So I took it upon myself to learn because I've always been very inquisitive. I've always wanted to just learn more about life, and I never really accepted the traditional dogma and propaganda that we receive, in the dominant culture and society. I never believed that it was natural to be sick. Even when I was 18, I just didn't accept that notion. I just somehow knew there was something more to this. And if you believe that, you're supposed to go through life, get old, get sick, then that's going to be your reality. Because, even in the Bible it says life and death begins with the power of the tongue. So I just always want to just know more because, whenever it comes to the area of health, pretty much doctors and pharmaceutical companies have a monopoly and they dictate what our health is. So that leaves you in a place of powerlessness. Right. So you have millions of people going to the doctor, going to hospitals, and getting killed every year as a result of it because they're totally ignorant to what's really going on, what the doctor's really doing, what type of drugs they're taking, what type of vaccines they're getting, what the vaccines contain. They're just ignorant. They don't teach us that in school and just overall in society. So I just wanted to learn more. And the more I learned, the more I was like, wow, this is a conspiracy. When people think of the term conspiracy, they get all spooked out. But conspiracy is actually a criminal term. It's a law enforcement term. A conspiracy just means when a group of individuals get together and plan to commit something which otherwise will be illegal. So me and Dr. Baruch got together and said, hey, we're gonna take some money from these people over here in Silver Spring, Maryland, and they're not gonna know about it. Me and Dr. Baruch will start a bank, because that's what banks do. They steal your money and you don't even know about it.
Right.
If we were to commit some type of action, we plan to commit something that would be illegal. That's what conspiracy is.
Sure.
So that's what we're dealing with here in America. There is a conspiracy to make us sick for profit. Because here in America, the healthcare, or the so-called healthcare, it's really a disease care industry, is a $2.3 trillion business. We spend more on disease care than we spend on war. And the entire economy of this country is based upon debt, disease, and death, if you will. So this is a business. And most of us are just being used as mere disposable commodities by this whole medical mafia that we have in this country.
Brother Chris, you use strong terms, and I think those terms are relevant. I think they're real. I think it's indeed what it is that we're facing in the United States of America. You've done research specifically in the area of vaccines, and just wanted to find out, what it is, what kind of moved you into that space, and what work you did do, and what did you find when you got there?
Yeah, so I started looking into the issue of vaccines about the age of several years ago, the age of 23. Because again, vaccines are one of those things that is considered to be a medical miracle. They're so great, they're so effective. The reason why we have a lot of less infectious diseases, smallpox, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, etc. So it's one of those things where you do not question the issue of vaccines. It's almost like a religion in this country. They're great, they're safe, they're effective. Get them. Everyone needs to get them. So, when I started just doing some research, and again, it was actually from a conspiratorial standpoint of how these vaccines are actually not so safe. I started learning about, number one, just all the different ingredients that they put in vaccines.
Right.
So whenever they talk about the issue of vaccines, it's always, you always hear how great they are, how effective they are. But there's never much information about what the vaccines actually contain. Whenever you listen to a media report and they talk about how all these epidemics could be prevented by vaccines, and get your vaccines, and vaccines don't cause autism, all this propaganda that you hear in the media, because the media is totally financed by Big Pharma. They are totally dependent upon ad dollars from Big Pharma. You never hear about, hey, the vaccines contain aluminum, they contain aborted fetal tissue, they contain MSG, they contain mercury, they contain genetically modified human blood, genetically modified human album, which essentially is blood. They contain antibiotics, they contain food coloring. So when you really read, when you really understand the ingredients, you're like, some of these different things are quite toxic and they should not be injected in the body.
Sure.
So my research into vaccines, number one, from a very early point, showed me that vaccines had nothing to do with actually preventing disease and lowering the rates of infectious diseases. If you study the work of Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, she actually notes that many of the vaccines that were put out were actually came out when the disease was already on the decline. So the polio vaccine came out when polio was on the decline. The smallpox vaccine came out when the smallpox vaccine was on the decline. So all these different vaccines have been released on the public. They came out, after the disease was virtually non-existent on decline. And the reason why those diseases decreased was because of good sanitation and better standards of living throughout the world. But then here come the vaccine makers that, we have this great medical miracle, and this is the reason why, the diseases are gone. When in reality, the diseases are more prevalent now because the vaccines actually contain the very disease that they're trying to prevent. And they oftentimes contain a live a live version of the disease they're trying to prevent. So the polio vaccine actually contains polio. The smallpox vaccine oftentimes contains smallpox. So for people, so essentially you inject the disease into people, and then it causes the disease to spread. So then the media comes along and says, oh, we have an outbreak of polio, and that's why we need more vaccines. So then essentially Big Pharma is creating a problem that they're essentially creating the problem that they suppose they're trying to prevent. And they're creating a problem to sell more vaccines. So vaccines have nothing to do with a medical miracle, have nothing to do with saving people's lives, nothing to do with preventing disease. They're all about creating disease so they can sell more vaccines and sell more drugs. So essentially, if you inject people with all these different neurotoxins, because that's what mercury, aborted fetal tissue, aluminum, and all these other MSG, that's all these different things are. And you can sell more psychiatric drugs. If you inject people with aborted fetal tissue, which causes their immune system and body to begin to attack itself, then you can sell more autism treatments. You can sell more cancer treatments. Because as was noted in the book, Murder by Injection by Eustace Mullins, cancer in this country was virtually non-existent until you had mass vaccination. And the people that were behind mass vaccination in this country were the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers were billionaires who essentially took over the medical industry in this country. So they got rid of homeopaths, got rid of all naturopaths, and they created this very standardized medical system where you had to spend all this money in order to get trained to be a doctor. And you essentially, once you became trained, were going to push their patented drugs. In order to create demand for the patented drugs, you needed sick people. So that's why Rockefellers came along and said, okay, well, we're going to create vaccines to make people sick. And we're going to push these vaccines on people when they're very young to make sure, that we produce customers at a very early age. It's the same reason why McDonald's, they give you a Happy Meal. They're trying to get you to become a lifelong fast food or disease food eater for your entire life. So the same thing with vaccines. They're injecting people with vaccines when they first come out of the womb to produce more pharmaceutical customers. It's not about public health, it's about pharmaceutical profits.
That's what's up. Now, let's talk also about the reality that there was a point in the recent history where vaccination companies, where these big pharmaceutical companies were given like the green light.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What do you know about that?
Yes, in 1986, so vaccines have been around since the early 1900s. And, as much as we love to hear about how vaccines were so ineffective and how great they were causing a lot of injuries. There were numerous people, for example, in the early 1960s and 70s who were getting injured and suffered encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, as a result of the Tdap vaccine, for example. So you had a lot of people, all throughout the history of vaccinations who suffered paralysis, death, permanent injury, encephalitis, sudden infant death syndrome, which essentially is where a baby gets a vaccine and just essentially dies. So you had a lot of people who were dying and were getting injured from the vaccines. So that's something you don't hear about when they talk about the issue of vaccines. So people have been suffering from vaccine injuries for the past almost 100 years. So what happened was that all these different lawsuits that the vaccine makers were getting hit with were reducing their profits. So as any cutthroat drug cartel does, the drug cartel is like, hey, we have to get rid of all of these lawsuits. They're killing us. We're not making any money. So they went to the federal government and said, hey, federal government and politicians, we need immunity. We're making a product which we know is killing people, making them sick, because it's supposed to make them sick and kill them. So we need immunity from this. We don't need to have all these lawsuits. They're hurting our profits. We need immunity, and we need it now. So Ronald Reagan, in 1986, and the whole Congress, they created what's known as the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. And this act created the National Vaccine Compensation Program, and essentially gave pharmaceutical companies legal immunity from all vaccine injuries. So essentially, if you take a vaccine and suffer a permanent injury or even death as a result of the vaccine, then pharmaceutical companies are no longer liable. The pharmaceutical company, you actually, in order to obtain any sort of compensation, you actually have to file a claim through this whole vaccine court and this program known as the National Vaccine Compensation Program. In order to file a claim, number one, it takes a very long time to be able to even file a claim. 83% of the time, the claims are denied because essentially you have the federal government and the attorneys at the Department of Justice actually fighting on the behalf of the pharmaceutical companies to deny your claim. And the funding for the program actually comes through vaccine sales. So every time they sell a vaccine or a doctor administers a vaccine, a portion of the proceeds of that sale of the vaccine goes towards this program. So essentially you have not the vaccine manufacturers paying for the program. They're not paying for it all. It's the vaccinated population or the vaccine injured who are paying for this program. So the federal government isn't paying for the program, and Big Pharma is not paying for the program. And in order to be able to file a claim, you can no longer file a civil lawsuit. You have to go through this whole big vaccine bureaucracy. And 83% of the time, your claim is denied. And even if your claim is approved, it takes about 3 to 5 years to go through the entire process in order to get any sort of recourse from the federal government. So it's a long and arduous process, which is meant to discourage people from continuing to move forward in their claim. So many people actually, if they have a child that's vaccine injured, they just, after about 3 years, they don't have enough money to pay for legal fees. They're just going to cancel their claim altogether. And even if the claim goes through, there's a good chance that the claim will be denied. But yet, even in all that, since 1986, the federal government has paid out close to about $3 billion in vaccine injury claims since 1986. And this is something they don't talk about in the media as well. They talk about how great and safe and effective vaccines are, but if they're so safe and effective, how come, the federal government paid out $3 billion for people who have suffered vaccine injuries? And consider that 83% of the claims that actually brought to this vaccine court are denied. So if those claims were approved, that amount probably close to about maybe $100 million. I'm not a mathematician, but you do basically divide $3 billion by 0.83, and get that amount, and that's the total amount of claims that are legitimately owed. Even furthermore, CDC actually puts out studies. And the CDC actually works for Big Pharma, and many of the people who own stock and own the patents, such as Dr. Paul Offit, who owned the patent for the rotavirus vaccine, which causes, diarrhea, causes all the different things that's supposed to prevent. The people who determine what is added to the vaccine schedule actually do the science at the CDC, and that science is used by the vaccine court to deny claims. So, all this science that CDC puts out saying that there's no link between vaccines and autism, that science is then used by the vaccine courts to deny people whose kids have autism as a result of the vaccines.
Brother Chris, are you saying that there is a link between the vaccines and autism?
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. There has been a dramatic increase of the rates of autism since 1986, when all these different vaccines have been added to the schedule. Because before 1986, there were maybe roughly about 8 different vaccines which kids are supposed to get. But once pharmaceutical companies got immunity, they realized, well, hey, I have a drug which is mandated pretty much by law, people believe it's mandated, it's really not. But in order for kids to go to school, they have to get the vaccines, or that's what they're told. They're not told about the exemptions. So they're told that you have to get the vaccines, and there's no immunity. So, once you produce a vaccine, that's almost $1 billion worth of profit every year, because you're not going to face any lawsuits. The federal government is going to be behind you and push these vaccines into the population. All the local governments and state governments are going to coerce the parents to get the vaccines. With all these different vaccines, so after that law was passed, you had all these different vaccines which are after the schedule. So now kids are getting close to about 69 doses of vaccines by the age of 18.
So wait a minute. Are you saying that they have an option? Like you can opt out of getting a vaccine?
Absolutely.
Vaccinated? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
How does that work?
You can't opt out. Vaccines are not in about 3 different states. The vaccines are not mandatory. You can obtain a religious, a philosophical, or a medical exemption. Now, what they are trying to do, what the AMA is trying to do, and what Big Pharma is trying to do, is eliminate all those exemptions. And that's what happened recently in California, was that they eliminated a philosophical and a religious exemption. So the only exemption that you can obtain from a doctor is a medical exemption. Now the problem with that is a doctor is being paid by Big Pharma. The doctors have they have a vaccine bias. They are pro-vaccine because they are brainwashed in medical school that vaccines are safe and effective. And plus, they get a cut from every vaccine that they administer because they get kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, and they get paid or bribed to push these vaccines because the doctors actually, not naturopaths, but many MDs are essentially legalized drug dealers. And to touch on your point about autism, vaccines being linked to autism, it was known in early 2000 because many of the vaccines contain dimerisol, which is a mercury-based preservative. It was known that dimerisol is a known cause of autism. And the CDC and many of the big pharmaceutical agents actually got together and discussed this with each other and discussed, hey, what we're going to do about the fallout, from the vaccines causing autism. So it's not just the mercury, though. It's the fact that vaccines contain neurotoxins like aluminum. They contain aborted fetal tissue, because whenever you inject human DNA into the body, this causes the body to begin to attack human DNA. So the body essentially begins to attack itself. So it's thought that autism is actually an autoimmune illness. And what better way to trigger autoimmune illnesses than to inject somebody with human DNA? That's the best way to do it. So the fact that the vaccines contain mercury, which they still do, they contain aluminum. The MMR vaccine has been shown to cause autism by disrupting the digestive system, which, it's known that there's a direct link between your gut and your brain health. It destroys your digestive system. And vaccines also contain MSG, which is linked to autism, and the aborted fetal tissue. And plus, it's the amount of vaccines that people are getting. They're just overloading the immune system, and the immune system essentially begins to attack itself. And you're overloading the body with all these different heavy metals. So it's the combination of the amount of vaccines, the ingredients in the vaccines, such as aluminum, mercury, and the fact that most of the vaccines contain human DNA. And also the MMR vaccine, which has been known to cause autism. It's been shown to cause a 240% increase risk of autism in black boys exclusively, and 167% increased risk of autism in blacks altogether. So it's known these vaccines are really hurting kids, but hey, vaccine makers don't care. They have no immunity. Government doesn't care because they're controlled by the vaccine makers. So it's just it's a business, and as a result of pushing all these vaccines, you have created the sickest generation ever witnessed in mankind, our generation of children today.
That's what's up. I'm amazed at some of the information that you have and that you're sharing with us, and hopefully our listening audience is paying close attention to what it is that we're hearing. And I always encourage people, do your research. If you don't believe, go do your research. It doesn't take much. And don't do your research from, Flim Flam Louie, out on the internet. Because Flim Flam Louie's been flim flamming a whole lot of people for a long time. And you don't go to the pharmaceutical drug companies to find out, where they're doing and where they have is wrong. So we're going to take a momentary break just for a minute here. We're going to be right back with more of the interview with Brother Curtis Duncan here on the Dr. Baruch Show. You all stay tuned. We'll be right back. With the Dr. Baruch Show here on the Eli Media Network. And we're interviewing a brother who is very knowledgeable about health and wellness, and specifically, he's been talking about the pharmaceutical drug companies and alleging that they are the primary cause for many of the health challenges that we have today. And again, I encourage you in the listening audience to be prudent. You do the research, because it's really important that you understand that if you're just taking this based on what people say and you're not qualifying it further so that you get the validation on your own, then, you know, is it really going to be something that you believe? Or is it going to be something, oh, I just heard this on the Dr. Baruch show, you know, he's got a lot of different and different thinking people that come on the show. You know, I want you to understand something else, that I don't just bring anybody on the show. So I don't want you to think that the people that I bring before you, I don't vet. You know, these are people who I've either known or I've done research on. I've looked into the things that they're talking about, the positions that they take, the angle that they take, the comments that they make. You know, these are things that we look into because we want to make sure that we present to you something that represents us. Because at the end of the day, it does. You know, so, but I want you, the audience, I want you all to understand your responsibility to yourself. You know, you got to stop looking at television. You got to stop looking at posts on Facebook. You got to stop looking at tweets. You got to stop looking at signs. You got to stop and just accepting what you see as being valid and true. You have to begin to qualify everything. We live in a world full of lies and liars. And in most part, the lies and liars are the reason why we're so sick. And we now have to start listening to the truth, and we have to start listening to people who benefit from us being well and benefit from us knowing the truth. Because the pharmaceutical drug dealers don't benefit from you knowing the truth. The pharmaceutical drug dealers do not benefit from you being well. You know, you got to look at what the interest that they have in the game. So, you know, we got a couple of comments, a couple of questions. We're going to fire off to Brother Curtis, as he's our guest for the next hour and a half. We're going to fire off some questions, and we're going to get his information. But again, Brother Curtis, I appreciate you coming on board with us, and I appreciate the energy that you're bringing and the knowledge that you're imparting upon us today. But
my pleasure. Thanks again for having me on there. It's definitely a distinct honor, dear brother.
Great. And what we'll do is we're going to jump in now to information that you shared, and you actually just started talking about it, how seemingly the pharmaceutical drug companies are targeting a certain segment of the population. And I want you to drive down the road with us and tell us what you mean, tell us, where all that comes from, and then give us some of the results that make us know that, wow, this really is happening. Go ahead.
Well, the first thing people should know is that the entire medical paradigm that we have right now, again, is the invention of John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller was an oil monopolist, as many people might know. He was founder of Standard Oil. And once he kind of formulated his the oil monopoly, he then decided, well, hey, we can, because his father used to be a seller of patented drugs. For example, Coca-Cola used to actually contain cocaine. It still does contain cocaine now in the form of high fructose corn syrup, which is actually worse than cocaine. So his father used to be the salesperson of patented drugs. So when the Rockefellers decided to get involved in the medical monopoly or in the medical industry, he sought to create a system that would produce profit. Was not going to be about public health or about saving people's lives. Because before in the early 1900s, you had naturopaths, you had homeopaths, you had chiropractics, you had all these different natural holistic doctors that were curing people of their diseases. When the Rockefellers came along, they realized this is dumb. We have to create a system that's not based upon cures, that's going to be based upon treatments and endless treatments. So we're going to push radiation to supposedly cure cancer, when radiation is a cause of cancer. But the benefit of that is that we'll be able to sell more chemotherapy and radiation. So the Rockefellers were essentially the creators or the inventors of this medical paradigm, and this is well documented in the book Murder by Injection by Eustace Mullins. It talks about how the Rockefellers got involved in this whole medical monopoly. Another doctor that talks about that is Dr. Nancy Banks, author of the book AIDS, Opium, and Diamonds. She also talks about the influence of the Rockefellers with the Flexner Report and how they created this whole monopolization of the medical system that was based upon allopathic medicine, which means cut, drug, and burn. So in allopathic medicine, they don't treat the body they just treat the body as it is an object that just needs to be doused with poisons in order to heal itself, which is totally asinine and it's backwards. But that's what essentially allopathic medicine is. It's derived from Germany, and it was brought here to America, and it is a system of cut, drug, and burn. But the Rockefellers also were involved in something known as the American eugenics movement, and this is documented in the book War on the Weak by Edmund Black. And you have the Rockefellers and all these other different billionaires and captains of industry who essentially created a movement that said that people who are white are genetically superior, and people who are black, brown, and anyone was not the Aryan race essentially. The Aryan race essentially is not blonde hair, blue eye, is essentially genetically inferior. And these people who are genetically inferior need to be killed off. We need to discourage the population of these group of individuals, and we need to encourage the population of people who are genetically superior. So the Rockefellers were huge opponents of this movement and spent billions and billions of dollars into this movement. And what they did was that they actually created laws which mandated that certain genetically inferior people be sterilized. So black women were sterilized from the early 1900s to early 1960s. Close to about 5,000 people in this country, including thousands of black women, were forcibly sterilized. They would go to a doctor because they might have gotten a broken toe or a broken bone, and when they came out, their womb was gone. And this happened to the famous civil rights activist by the name of Fannie Lou Hamer, who actually was involved in the Mississippi Democratic Party. Famous civil rights activist. At an early age, she was taken to a doctor in Mississippi, and she went in just for a routine medical procedure. When she came out, her womb was gone. So this entire eugenics movement really became law in this country. It became law in close to about 50 different states. People were forcibly sterilized, essentially. And what happened was that the Nazis got a hold of this eugenics movement. They're like, this is a pretty good idea. We should implement this with the Jews and other non-white people within Germany. So they, essentially the Nazis actually were inspired by the movement that the Rockefellers created. So you have a eugenicist that is involved in medicine, and you have a billionaire that's involved in eugenics and in medicine. So is medicine a form of eugenics? And yes, it is. And the reason why it is because, as I mentioned, the Rockefellers were involved in the push of vaccines in order to produce more sick patients to sell their patented drugs. But the vaccines themselves, actually were designed to be anti-fertility vaccines. And the Rockefeller Foundation in the early 1970s, sought to develop vaccines and other forms of injectable contraceptives to sterilize black and brown people throughout the globe. In the early 1970s, so you had the Rockefeller Foundation in the 1970s developing these anti-fertility vaccines. They started doing research into this. And also in 1974, Henry Kissinger, in his national security referendum, he stated that in order for the United States empire to better effectively steal the resources found in Africa, which is, has the world's biggest resources, the people within these third world countries need to be depopulated, and they need to be depopulated through wars. They need to be depopulated through family planning or abortions, and through injectable contraceptives. So now, now essentially, so you had injectable contraceptive recommended and became policy of the United States government. And then you had the Rockefeller Foundation doing research into the anti-fertility vaccines. So then in the early 1900s, you see all these different, vaccination pushes in Africa. You see a smallpox vaccination push. That was an anti-fertility vaccine that was designed to depopulate Africa, and they did that all throughout the world. You see the polio vaccine being pushed all throughout the world in India and other different countries. That was, the polio vaccine actually contained a cancer virus. It was contaminated with a cancer virus, and millions of people here in America and throughout the globe were exposed to this different cancer virus. The polio vaccine was also about depopulation, because it caused paralysis and oftentimes instantaneous death. And now moving up into the into 1990s, you had the tetanus vaccine. It was pushed in Mexico, in the Philippines, in Africa, in Haiti, and this was actually found to contain an ingredient which caused abortions, spontaneous abortions. So you had that vaccine. Recently in 2008, in Kenya, close to about 2 million people were given a tetanus vaccine, and there were different bishops in Kenya that found that this vaccine was contaminated again with an ingredient which made women sterile. So it caused them to be sterilized. So close to about 3 million people in Africa and Kenya were sterilized with this tetanus vaccine. And now you have the HPV vaccine, which is a vaccine which is given towards young girls, young fertile girls, for a disease that they get when they're 60, according to all the medical statistics, cervical cancer. Cervical cancer is a really rare disease, and most women get it when they are between the age of 55 and 60. But yet they're giving it to women when they're 14 years old. They're not giving the vaccine when the women are 50 or when they're 45 or when they're 60. They're giving the vaccine when they're 13, 12, 15, and 14. And the vaccine has been shown to not only cause a 400% increased risk of miscarriage, but it also causes premature menopause. So it functionally sterilizes young girls. And this vaccine is being pushed by people like Bill Gates. So essentially, a long time ago, you had the Rockefellers. Now you have Bill Gates, and his father was heavily involved in the eugenics movement. Bill Gates now is pushing this vaccine in exclusively black and brown countries. He's pushing this in India. He's pushing this in Mexico. He's pushing this, in Africa. And right here in America, you have Planned Parenthood, which is recommending that blacks, because blacks supposedly have such high rates of the HPV virus, they are pushing this virus onto black women. They're pushing this virus onto black boys now too. And you have the CDC, which is actually recommending that this vaccine be mandated, throughout the country. So the HPV vaccine essentially is a mass sterilization campaign. You had a recent campaign, which I noted here in Atlanta, in which the public transit system, which has an 83% black ridership, had all these different ads telling black parents to get their kids vaccinated with the HPV vaccine. Because not only does sterilizes girls, it destroys testosterone and sperm within boys. Because now they're pushing the HPV vaccine on boys as well. So the HPV vaccine is definitely an anti-fertility vaccine. And if you read the back of the insert if you read the back of the insert of any vaccine, it will state that it has never been studied for effects upon fertility, effects upon cancer, and the effects upon mutations. So essentially, whenever you take a vaccine, the big pharma is admitting that we haven't really evaluated whether this causes cancer, whether it causes mutations which lead to cancer, or whether it sterilizes you. And but we know for a fact that the reason why they don't evaluate it is because the vaccines cause cancer, they cause mutations, and it sterilizes you. Not only through the heavy metals, but the way the vaccines are designed deliberately to functionally kill off and sterilize black and brown people. And as a modern example of that is the apartheid regime of South Africa, which received millions of dollars from our United States government. during the early 1980s and 70s, they were actually trying to develop a vaccine which would selectively kill off the blacks within South Africa. And even in early 2000, a project for the New American Century, again, that's the Project the New American Century, which was a national security think tank, which Dick Cheney was heavily involved in. They actually mentioned that they were looking to develop race-based bioweapons to essentially kill off targeted populations. And we know that the Israeli government has been developing these race-based bioweapons to kill Palestinians. And South Africa was developing these bioweapons, and the bioweapon was a vaccine to kill off blacks. And just the fact that the vaccines are being pushed into the third world, and the fact that the MMR vaccine, the MMR vaccine by itself, causes a 167% increased risk of autism in blacks exclusively, and a 240% increased risk of autism in black boys. So black boys have the highest rate of autism as a result of the vaccine. That is proof within itself. The fact that you have a billionaire who was heavily involved in the eugenics movement, with developing anti-fertility vaccines. The federal government mentioned that injectable contraceptives, i.e. Norplant, i.e. vaccines, i.e. Depo-Provera, will be used to depopulate Africa, and the fact that the vaccines actually have such an increased risk of autism in blacks exclusively, that is proof enough, that the vaccines are what I call black genocide. They are part of the whole eugenics, black genocide movement.
That's what's up. That's a lot to take in. You're listening here to Brother Curtis Duncan on the Dr. Baruch Show on the E-Life Media Network. And we're going to keep going because this is getting exciting, and it's not exciting because I'm happy. It's exciting because I'm becoming more knowledgeable about something that I need to be aware of. And as I become more knowledgeable, and hopefully you're doing the same thing, as we become more knowledgeable, we now prepare to make changes and adjustments. Because if we continue on the course that we're going on, we're going to continue getting these awful results that we're getting. And I think we've just decided to just accept that, okay, we're all just going to get sick, and everybody's just going to be sick, and we've just become so comfortable with that, and not understanding that there's an agenda to remove you off the face of the planet. We're okay with protesting in the streets if a police officer shoots a guy, in broad daylight for nothing. But we're not prepared to engage in that same process because we have yet to really sufficiently accept the reality that the modern medical, the modern pharmaceutical, and even at many levels, the modern government is complicit in an effort to cut us off as a people. So then what do? Because there has to be an act that we can engage. There has to be something that we can do in response to this. You can't just keep doing what you have been doing. You have to do something different. So these vaccines, as Brother Curtis is sharing with us, is affecting our ability to reproduce. But also, Brother Curtis, you bring attention to the fact that the vaccines are affecting our endocrine system in ways that are causing men to be more inclined to men, and women likewise to women. Talk about that for us.
Yeah, so the vaccines, the vaccines that contain mercury, and mercury is a heavy metal, is one of the most toxic substances known to man, and many of the vaccines still contain mercury to this day. As I was telling a parent the other day, they're like, oh, I get my child vaccinated, but I make sure they have mercury-free vaccines. I was like, well, they say mercury-free, but it's actually not mercury-free. They add mercury initially to the manufacturing process and then remove it, so it still contains like 0.001% mercury. So it's not mercury-free. So it does still contains trace amounts of the most toxic substance known to man, which there is no safe level of exposure to. None of us would ever break open a thermometer and swallow the liquid in it, which is filled with mercury. But yet they inject us directly into our bloodstream with mercury. But another interesting thing about mercury is that mercury has been found by scientists at the University of Florida who were studying, mercury exposure in birds down in the Everglades. And what they found is that when the birds were exposed to mercury, those birds, the male birds, became homosexual. And scientists were just fascinated because, this area has been contaminated probably as a result of, coal-fired power plants which are a major source of mercury pollution throughout the globe. They were fascinated that this heavy metal was causing these male birds to be homosexual. So when I discovered that research on birds, how the mercury is making birds gay, and then you start doing more research, you find that mercury actually, when a developing fetus is exposed to mercury within the womb, it actually blocks testosterone. So essentially, all fetuses essentially are females, until testosterone kicks in. We all develop as women essentially in the womb as we're developing. Which means that without the presence of testosterone, then we will not have, men will not have testicles. Our ovaries won't descend, if you will, and become testicles. Our clitoris won't become a penis, and we will essentially have the brain of a woman and the gender identity of a woman. So what happens is that when you would directly inject mercury into the body, so when you give women a flu shot, which the CDC still recommends, which is known to contain high levels of mercury, that mercury then goes directly into the bloodstream and blocks the developing fetus from getting testosterone, because the testosterone actually is what masculinizes the body and masculinizes the brain. And when you block testosterone, then the developing fetus, the developing male fetus, will not undergo a full masculinization. Masculinization meaning of their physical features, as I just mentioned, penis and the testicles, nor of their brain. That will not take place without adequate amounts of testosterone. So if you block that, which mercury is, is a heavy metal, which blocks the function of testosterone, then you essentially have a developing male fetus, which is a biological male, but has the gender identity of a woman and is attracted to men. So that's what mercury does. Now, the interesting thing about mercury is that many of the vaccines now that are found in America and in Europe do not contain mercury anymore, or the flu vaccine does, but a lot of vaccines they remove mercury because CDC realized that a lot of these vaccines contain mercury, and there's a link between mercury and autism. A lot of parents are concerned, so let's just go ahead and remove mercury from the vaccines, even though they still contain aluminum, which is almost as dangerous as mercury. They still contain MSG. They still contain aborted fetal tissue and all these other different toxic agents. So they could still contain everything else, but it just doesn't have mercury in it as much, or they have lower levels. But all the vaccines which they push on the third world, all the vaccines for Africa, all the vaccines for Asia, for Latin America, have mercury in them. So essentially you have a situation where the UN recommended that, okay, for the vaccines for Europe and for America, okay, we can make those mercury free. But for vaccines everywhere else, for the developing world, for the third world, those are going to contain mercury. So the mercury, again, it causes homosexuality. That's been proven in animals, and human beings are animals. And through the mechanism I just mentioned, it also causes homosexuality in humans by blocking the availability of testosterone within the developing fetus. Not only that, mercury also causes spontaneous abortions. It causes infertility. When men are exposed to mercury, it destroys their testosterone, destroys their ability to produce sperm. And the mercury itself actually also causes miscarriages. So that's why a lot of women, as soon as they get a flu shot, oftentimes they're no longer pregnant. If they are pregnant, then there's a good risk that they're going to have a child that's going to be homosexual. And again, a lot of people say, this is, you're trying to hate on the LGBT community. Nothing to do with hating on the LGBT community, because I personally have no hatred nor judgment towards them and their sexual orientation. This is about eugenics. When you create a chemical or inject people with chemicals that are known to cause homosexuality, you are trying to achieve population control. And don't believe me, believe the words of the president of Planned Parenthood. Again, Planned Parenthood was financed by the Rockefellers and by the Rockefeller Foundation, these billionaire eugenicists. So that's why the founder, Margaret Sanger, first put abortion clinics in black neighborhoods. Now, if it was such a problem throughout America, then you would put them, all throughout the country. But no, she had what was known as the Negro Project, where she put abortion clinics exclusively in Harlem. She didn't put them in white neighborhoods. She didn't put them in white immigrant communities. She put them in black communities to lower the population of blacks, because she's a eugenicist who was financed by the Rockefellers, and blacks were considered to be, reckless breeders who need to be killed off. So that's why she put the abortion clinics in black neighborhoods. But the president of Planned Parenthood mentioned that in order to achieve population control, we must add fertility control agents to the water. So you have via fluoride. That's one of the reasons why fluoride is in the water, because it destroys testosterone, lowers male sperm count. You also have the birth control pill, which is actually added to the water too, and that's secretly added to the water because when women take birth control, 80% of the estrogen is actually peed out. So that they pee it out, and then ends up in the drinking water, and it's not being filtered out by the government. So millions of Americans are being exposed to the birth control pill, and heavy amounts of estrogen within the drinking water is actually causing male fish to become hermaphrodites, or to become transgendered, if you will. So they're developing female sex organs. So Planned Parenthood, they acknowledge this, and they also state that they want to increase homosexuality within the population. So they outlined this in one of their population control memos that they put out in 1969. So that's why you have, vaccines which contain mercury and all these other different chemicals such as atrazine, bisphenol A, and other different chemicals that people are being exposed to, which causes people's gender identity to change and cause them to be homosexuals. This is about population control. And so if you can increase the amount of homosexuality, then you lower the amount of population within certain targeted groups, because homosexuals tend not to have kids, because they're not attracted to they're not attracted to the opposite sex, and they usually do not have kids as a result of it. So that's what it's about. It's about eugenics. I want to emphasize that people don't get it twisted, trying to claim I'm trying to, promote hatred. I'm not. This is about exposing a population eugenics agenda that is about achieving genocide by definition of the United Nations. Because whenever you selectively try to decrease the population of a certain group via coercive means, i.e. vaccines, i.e. birth control, i.e. homosexuality chemicals, or agents like mercury, then that is an act of genocide, according to the United Nations. So that's what I'm merely exposing here.
Great. And again, this is not information that is, just being discovered by Brother Curtis, but this is information that is out there, and he has shared with us some books, and we're going to make sure we go over that before the show's over, but books and other resources where this information is being distributed, but it doesn't, like much information that we need, it doesn't get distributed into our communities. Again, you all are listening to Brother Curtis Duncan as he's talking to us about research that he's done in the world of vaccinations and in the world of population reduction, population control. And we're going to be right back with more of the Dr. Baruch Show here on the eLife Media Network in just one moment. You all stay tuned. And while we're gone on the break, please share and like and send to your friends. Tell them to tune in. And if you'd like to ask Brother Curtis a question, you can do so at 240-455-5934. Again, 240-455-5934. We're going to be right back with more of the Dr. Baruch Show. Stay tuned.
How could everyone get out my face? Get out of here. Don't even try. That isn't a base. If it is, then I guess you took it to another place. Then one day, to my surprise, I said, spread around like a fire. Talk away to the wire. No, such a musician must admire. And I say this because everybody should know who he was. Time to go now. Do you know how to find who Jacob was? Find who was white just before. Now that I'm through, guess I told you. And I sing this song with fear and love, 'cause I know Jacob.
We're back with Dr. Baruch's show. We're interviewing Brother Curtis Duncan today, and he's talking to us about the world of vaccines, the world of the pharmaceutical drug industry, eugenics, Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, J.D. Rockefeller, man, the food industry, the government. At some point, at some point we've got to realize that, maybe there's something to this. Because when you look, if the government is supposed to be protecting you, then obviously some of these things, as the research has come to the fore, the government should take a stronger position about protecting the population. And when you find out that what they're doing in other countries, and I happened to travel to Sierra Leone back in 1993, and I saw people were smoking cigarettes, and I noticed the cigarettes had just a different smell. It was a different smell to the cigarettes over there. And I don't know what chemicals were added to the cigarettes, along with the fact that everybody's cigarettes were expired. Every pack I looked at, the date was like a year ago. Well, how y'all smoking a cigarette? This is what we get here, so this is what we do. And I'm sure that is the case across the board. When I was in Tanzania, I talked to them about I guess that was a smallpox vaccine, and I talked to them about these videos that had come out in the United States of America where they talked about the smallpox vaccine was laced with a virus, and this virus that it was laced with was in fact causing folk to think that they had HIV and AIDS. And of course they were amazed. They flocked around. I mean, it was like, I felt like at some point I was like this, this messenger from God, because more and more people started coming, and they kept coming and they kept coming. I was like, well, this could get serious, y'all. Look, I'm gonna give y'all the DVD. Y'all get around the television, because I don't need nobody from the government coming to check me out, tonight at 4:00 in the morning, and all of a sudden, where's Duncan? I don't know. I don't know. He was in there last night. But, that's one thing we have to be careful of, too. We have to be mindful that, we are going up against a huge machine. And this machine obviously has no problem with taking people's lives. And definitely wouldn't have a problem taking the life of somebody that's trying to stop them from taking the lives that they planned on taking in the first place. So, this is big. Now, Brother Chris is talking to us about, things being, in fact, targeted. So these biochemicals that are being created in these pharmaceutical labs are actually being created in such a way that they actually target certain populations, certain gender, even within populations. So not to mention that if you got a medical doctor that's on the take, he knows you give the black people this one and you give everybody else that one. Or you give the dark people this, and if you get enough money, people will do anything. Oh, okay, so I'm going to get paid a little bit more if I do this. Then, okay. And I remember back, I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s, that the pharmaceutical drug company came up with this great idea, We're going to now produce drugs that are specific for certain races. So now we're going to give certain people, if you got diabetes, we're going to give you metformin. And everybody else, we're going to give glucophage. Why is that? My kidneys are different than their kidneys, But, of course, now we see the diabetic epidemic that we have within our community. And is there reason to believe that maybe these so-and-sos have been lying to us? And this ain't just like a little, pink lie. We'll call it that for the purposes of this conversation. This ain't no little pink lie. This is a straight up, they trying to kill some folk lie. That then makes you go up under the mattress and pull out your whatever you got up under there and say, I got to defend my family. So today we're talking to Brother Curtis Duncan, and he's talking about what is being done against us. And before we get him off the air, we're going to talk about what we have to do to protect ourselves. And I think a question that I'm getting, a couple of text messages that I got is, okay, so I've been vaccinated. So I've been vaccinated every year. So I've been vaccinated since, and I got the whatever, that vaccination that you get when you're very young. And so they go through this whole series of vaccinations. I'm good. I'm not feeling like I'm, interested in having sex with my kind. However, I want to get it out of my system. But Curtis, what is the plan and what is the path that somebody would take in order to now remove this damage, or is it irreparable?
The best way to remove damage is not to put in there in the first place. That's something I always like to tell people too. A pound, or they say an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. So prevention is definitely key, but to detox from the vaccines is definitely important. Because a lot of the vaccines contain heavy metals, you definitely want to take a lot of green leafy vegetables. So like cilantro is very good for detoxing mercury. That's very good for that. Blue-green algae, chlorella, spirulina, wheatgrass juice. All these different things will help to remove, very effective for removing a lot of heavy metals. Also, I definitely recommend that people, essentially, rebuild their gut health. Because whenever you have a healthy amount of probiotics in your system, that also helps in the detoxification process of heavy metals. So consuming a lot of fermented foods, like kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, it can be coconut yogurt if you don't eat dairy. But fermented foods are great for detoxing all different types of chemicals, heavy metals, etc. And another thing that's really effective is going to be chelation therapy. So many times when people have autism, they actually get chelation therapy from a doctor or from a naturopath who offers that. So that's something you can pursue as well, is chelation therapy, where you actually directly remove the heavy metals from your bloodstream. So that's another effective way to remove heavy metals. And a healthy diet. So the vaccines oftentimes, contain a lot of, they do cause brain damage. They do cause cancer. So you definitely want to consume a healthy diet. Avoid eating sugar, processed oils, grains, dairy. Definitely avoid some of those major disease-causing foods. I mean, those are the big, those are the big three: dairy.
I'm going to jump in right there because food is of course, I'm in the business of food.
Yeah.
And, I have chosen to be in the business of a specific kind of food. So we have vegan restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
And with regard to wheat and soy, why are wheat and soy now being identified for causing so many problems within our community? What's up with that?
Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to cover is, wheat essentially has only been in the human diet. For 99% of our existence, we are hunters and gatherers. And then roughly about 10,000 years ago, we went from a hunter-gatherer, way of life, in which we, hunted animals, ate berries, ate tubers.
Can I jump in just one second? My question, I put two questions into one. But my question is wheat and sugar.
Sure.
What's
Okay.
up with wheat and sugar? And why is wheat and sugar implicated in so many of the health challenges that we have? So wheat and sugar is my question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So wheat, number one, it's something that's only been in the human diet for less than 0.1% of our existence. Just like dairy. Dairy is only in the human diet for 0.01% of human existence. So human beings have been on this planet for close to about 100,000 years. Wheat and dairy dairy has been in our diet for the last 6,000 years, and wheat has been in our diet for the past 2,000 years. Now, when human beings went from hunters and gatherers to consumers of wheat, our health rapidly declined. We actually became shorter. Our brains got smaller. We developed bone disease. We developed tooth disease, or dental disease. We developed heart disease. We developed cancer. This is all back in the early days of ancient Egypt. In which they found, studies have shown that a lot of the mummies that they found in ancient Egypt actually contained signs of heart disease. And this is before they had high fructose corn syrup. They had, McDonald's and 7-Eleven, all these other junk food places. This is long, several thousand years ago. And the reason why is because human beings, once they switched from a hunter-gatherer diet to, a civilized diet, we became civilized once we developed agriculture and started farming, particularly for wheat. Our intake of carbohydrates dramatically increased. And as I mentioned, we became shorter, our lifespans lowered, we started developing dental disease, we started developing bone disease, we became malnourished because the grain themselves contain many different anti-nutrients. They contain different components which actually block the absorption of certain vitamins and minerals, particularly wheat. And wheat itself actually, essentially it's a carbohydrate, so it's sugar. So whenever you're eating large amounts of sugar, then you increase your risk not only of developing diabetes, type 2 diabetes, you increase your risk of developing heart disease. So it's not the saturated fat that causes heart disease, it's the carbohydrates that causes heart disease. So once we became hunters-gatherers and started eating wheat, and switched from hunters-gatherers and started becoming farmers and started eating wheat, our health rapidly declined. And now, so essentially wheat has always been problematic, even from 10,000 years ago when we started eating it. Now, we're moving into modern day wheat, okay? So, the wheat, a long time ago, traditionally it was fermented. People used to eat sourdough bread, and it took a long time to make this wheat. But now we have what's known as semi-dwarf wheat. The wheat has been hybridized, it's been radiated, it's been genetically mutated, and this wheat is a semi-dwarf wheat, which is really high in gluten. It's really high in gluten, and it's really high in sugar. So the wheat that we're consuming now, which is also developed by the Rockefeller Foundation, in order to increase yield. So the Rockefeller Foundation is involved in eugenics, they're involved in medicine, and they're also involved in agriculture. So genetically modified foods are products of the Rockefeller Foundation. Eugenics movement, Rockefeller Foundation. Vaccines and pharmaceutical drugs, Rockefeller Foundation. So
can I jump in? I just want to add two more to their resume because we need to be mindful of the fact that the Rockefellers are also involved in the modern educational system. and the
Absolutely.
deliberate dumbing down of America, and the Rockefeller and his crew of bandits are also involved in the development of the Federal Reserve, and how money is looked at, and the value, and how we're all enslaved. But I didn't want to interrupt you, except that I wanted people to understand how this guy, wherever you see his name, you know he's not working for your best interest ever.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Hopefully you could pick back up where you were. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you for adding that too. So essentially, the semi-dwarf wheat, it was created to increase yields, but what happened was it also increased diabetes and obesity, because again, it's a shorter version of wheat. It's because it's a dwarf wheat, and it contains more gluten, so it's a very, very high gluten type of wheat. Whereas the wheats from the ancient wheats, even though they were bad, those contain less gluten and less sugar, if you will, or less starches, which cause your blood sugar to dramatically rise. So the ancient wheat, while not it was bad, but today's wheat is even worse because it's genetically altered. It's sprayed with Roundup, which is made by Monsanto, which is causing all sorts of gut problems. It's irradiated. It's sprayed with all different types of chemicals besides Roundup. On top of that, and it's hybridized. So it's causing a dramatic increase of type 2 diabetes, obesity, celiac disease, autoimmune disease. It causes leaky gut disorder. Essentially, what leaky gut is that essentially whenever you consume wheat, the gluten itself actually causes the permeability of your intestines to be wide open. So it causes undigested food particles to go into your bloodstream. And if you understand digestion, that's not supposed to happen. Only digested food particles are ever supposed to enter your bloodstream. But what happens is the gluten actually destroys that intestinal permeability and causes undigested food particles to go into the digestive system. So this triggers inflammation within the body. And one thing all doctors will tell you, so if you go to your MD and you say, "Hey doc, why am I having diabetes? Why am I having cancer?" He's going to mention inflammation, because one of the top drugs that pharmaceutical companies prescribe are anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs. So things like aspirin, things like Vioxx, all of these different anti-inflammatory drugs. Well, why is Big Pharma prescribing all these different anti-inflammatory agents? Because inflammation is one of the number one causes of disease. Now, however, the anti-inflammatory agents they're prescribing also kill you in the process. So Vioxx killed 100,000 people. Aspirin kills 25,000 people. So all these different anti-inflammatory drugs kill you in the process of getting rid of the inflammation. But the root cause of the inflammation is the gluten, or the wheat that we are consuming, which is causing not only inflammation, but also causing obesity, because whenever you consume a lot of sugar, your insulin levels go up, and insulin tells your body to go into fat storing and promoting mode. So you're not burning fat now, you're actually storing fat and creating it. So insulin is essentially the hormone which governs whether you gain weight or lose weight. Not only that, whenever you have dramatic increases of blood sugar, which wheat causes, because 2 slices of wheat bread actually raise your blood sugar more than a Snickers bar. I'll say that again. 2 slices of wheat bread, whole wheat bread at that, raise your blood sugar more than a Snickers bar. So whenever you consume wheat, your blood sugar raises dramatically. And in order to get that down, your body has to release a massive amount of insulin. And what happens is, over time, you actually become resistant to insulin. Your cells become resistant to insulin. And insulin resistance is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes, which is also a hallmark of heart disease, high blood pressure, kidney disease, etc. So, and for most of us, this wheat that we're consuming is highly addictive because it actually stimulates opioid receptors in our brain. So essentially, wheat is a legalized form of heroin that we are consuming. So that's why it's so problematic. Now, in terms of sugar is a poison, essentially. Sugar is toxic, and whenever we consume sugar, again, our blood sugar raises dramatically. Sugar also gets converted within 4 hours into fat by your liver, particularly because sugar is 1 part glucose, 1 part fructose. So the glucose causes a dramatic rise of insulin, which causes type 2 diabetes, and the fructose actually gets converted into fat by the liver. That's where it gets metabolized. just like alcohol is metabolized in the liver. And whenever you consume a large amount of sugar, not only do you develop high blood pressure, you develop fatty liver disease. You develop heart disease because all that fat goes directly into your bloodstream, where it attaches to your artery walls and causes hardening of the arteries and clogged arteries. Also, sugar causes high cholesterol and heart disease. Also causes dementia. Sugar makes you stupider. It makes you dumber. There's been studies that have shown that reduces your brain activity and actually shrinks your brain, and it also causes dementia and Alzheimer's. So it causes heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, belly fat. Belly fat actually is one of the major causes of heart disease and type 2 diabetes in this country. It's known that when you have a lot of fat around your gut, that not only does that decrease your levels of testosterone if you are a man and increase the amount of estrogen that you are producing, it also causes you to be at dramatic increased risk of dementia, cancer, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. Sugar also causes kidney disease. So that's why you saw these dialysis machines in black neighborhoods, because blacks, along with Native Americans, the two most oppressed groups in this country, are the #1 consumers of sugar. Native American and blacks, according to statistics. Then you have Hispanics, then you have whites. So it's kind of like a racial hierarchy, where it's like whites consume the least amount of sugar because they're the top of society. Hispanics kind of like, they consume pretty high amounts, but not as oppressed as Native Americans, who consume the second highest amounts. And then blacks and Native Americans, those two oppressed groups have the two highest amounts of sugar consumption in the United States. So sugar, as I mentioned, it causes dementia, it causes high blood pressure, it causes type 2 diabetes, it causes your blood sugar to rise dramatically. It also causes pancreatic cancer, which is the #1 cause of cancer that's in this country. When you get pancreatic cancer, that's pretty much it. Particularly if you go the traditional medical route, because there is no cure for pancreatic cancer. And pancreatic cancer, unlike other cancers like breast cancer and prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer spreads. So once you get pancreatic cancer, that's pretty much it. It's a death sentence. Again, if you're dealing with the medical mafia, you're dealing with chemotherapy and all the other different toxic agents. Because most doctors, when you get pancreatic cancer, they're not going to tell you that sugar feeds cancer, and that sugar is actually the cause of pancreatic cancer. I'm not going to tell you that. They're going to prescribe you chemotherapy and radiation, collect their $200,000 from the government. If you don't have insurance, they'll collect it from the government, or if you do have, they'll collect it from your insurance agent, your insurance company. They'll kill you in the process, and then they'll get $20,000 bonus because they get commissions off of each dose of chemotherapy that they get. The oncologists do. So that's why cancer and wheat are so toxic. They are the #1 cause of disease in this country. It's not fat, it's not the nuts, it's not saturated fat, it's not coconut oil, it's the carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates are highly addictive, and that's why you find wheat in everything. You find sugar in everything, because sugar is actually more addictive than cocaine. So when they talk about, the CIA is bringing crack into our communities, well, yeah, that was bad. But you have Coca-Cola, which actually used to contain cocaine and still does to the day. It's like, it's supposedly like a cocoa extract or whatever. But they actually have something more potent and powerful than cocaine. It's legal. It's known as a 20-ounce bottle of Coke, which contains high fructose corn syrup. And the more fructose you consume, the more fructose, the more you're going to crave sugar, because it's that addictive. Because it does not stimulate, it stimulates your appetite essentially. It does not suppress your hunger. So that's why people, just like they smoke menthol cigarettes, they down in canned Coke every day, like it's candy, because that's what sodas are. They're liquid candy, and they are, really killing us.
Yeah. Well, again, you're listening to Brother Curtis Duncan here on the Dr. Baruch Show on the eLife Media Network. You, again, for those of you who have questions or would like to become a part of this conversation, you can do so at 240-455-5934. If you have questions for our Brother Curtis Duncan. We're going to be right back with more programming here on the eLife Media Network. Stay tuned for more of the Dr. Baruch Show. Stay tuned. back up with the Dr. Baruch Show here on the eLife Media Network. We're interviewing Brother Curtis Duncan, who has been enlightening us on so much. It's hard for me to go through it all. I just encourage you in the viewing and listening audience to look at the video. You know, share this, look at it, check it out, learn, get your notepad out. We're talking about the health of our community. We're talking about what we need to do in order to maintain health. And what I wanted to jump into, because I know that black women or melanated, deeply melanated women tend to be more concerned about their health, at least when stuff goes wrong. You know, they're not as concerned about their health when they think that everything is cool, but they tend to be more concerned about their health when stuff goes wrong. They're quick to go to the doctor and say, "Doc, something ain't working right. Can you fix this?" Meanwhile, the brother's like, you know what? This happened like 6 years ago and it went away. It might go away again. Let me take that chance. So I want to talk to Brother Curtis, and I would like for you to share with us what you or what links we're seeing with regard to the melanated women and fibroid tumors and endometriosis, and then how many of us are turning to hysterectomies as a solution for that, as opposed to maybe some of the other solutions or another solution that would avoid us losing our capacity to reproduce self. Brother Chris Duncan, chime in for me.
Yeah, so the first thing is that, it is true that I do agree, a lot of women are much more concerned about their health than men are. And this is actually, many times a curse. It's a curse, a blessing, because I do promote people, taking responsibility for their health. But you cannot take responsibility for your health by dealing with the industry that profits from your disease. So essentially, if you're truly healthy, you're not going to a doctor. You're not getting a pap smear. You're not, you're not doing these things. Now, if you had a medical emergency, someone shot you, you've been in a car accident, had some really a traumatic medical emergency, you broke bones, something like that, then yeah, it's appropriate to deal with a doctor and hospitals in a situation like that. But if you're truly healthy and you're truly empowered, then you are not going to be dealing with doctors and the whole medical industry. But the medical industry does not ever empower you. So, they empower you. And they intentionally disempower you so they continue to make money from you. Because if you weren't sick, then they'll be out of business, essentially. So when it comes to black women and fibroids, endometriosis, yes, many black women have fibroids, for example, as a result of taking birth control. Now in this country, we have free birth control, which was given under Obamacare. And Obamacare was written by the pharmaceutical companies. It was written by the health insurance companies, and the whole free birth control thing was added as a provision to support Planned Parenthood, which Obama has been a very ardent supporter of, even before he got elected. One of the first places he did a speech at was at Planned Parenthood. He's been an ardent supporter of them. And Planned Parenthood does donate money, had donated money to Obama. So that's why he looked out for them by adding this whole free birth control measure. He wanted to help out his pharmaceutical buddies because one of his top campaign donors work for Pfizer, which is the big manufacturer of free birth control, and Planned Parenthood is the biggest distributor of birth control in this country. So a lot of black women, they're getting birth control now for free under Medicaid and under the Obamacare provision. But this exposes them to high levels of estrogen as a result of it. So what happens is, because of all the estrogen, they develop fibroid tumors. Because fibroid tumors is an estrogen-dependent disease. And this is something that even states on the federal government's website, is that fibroid tumors is caused by estrogen. Now, that might not make sense to a lot of people. Well, if it's caused by estrogen, then, it's just something that women get naturally, is what a lot of doctors will say, or it's genetic, or da-da-da-da. But close to about 70% of black women get fibroids and 50% of white women get fibroids. So why do black women have such high rates of fibroids in comparison to white women? So it doesn't make sense how it's genetic. In reality, it's not genetic. And if it's caused by estrogen, then it's really caused by excess estrogen that women are exposed to via their diet, via the environment, and via chemicals. So black women, in particular, have higher rates of contraceptive use. Again, because birth control is invented for eugenics. It's push birth control on black women, by giving to them for free and mandating it, oftentimes in many cases, when they're on Medicaid. So they're giving the birth control, not causing them to get fibroids as a result of being exposed to all the excess estrogens. Not only that, but you have black hair care products. Black hair care products, according to some researchers at the University of Pittsburgh, have the highest levels of estrogens out of any product on the market targeted towards a certain ethnic group. So overall, it has the highest level of estrogen out there. And many of the black hair care products, they actually contain the hormone estrogen actually within the ingredient. It contains estrogen, it contains placenta extract, which is essentially estrogen, the actual placenta from a baby. So when you go to the hospital and they take the placenta, they're using that to give that, they're using that to profit from. They're selling that back to you and putting in your black hair care product and causing you to get fibroids as a result of it. So it contains placenta extracts, it contains fragrance, which is another chemical which mimics estrogen, and it contains parabens. So, all these different components are found in very high amounts in black hair care products. And that's one of the reasons why black girls have such high rates of early puberty, which also increases your lifetime exposure to estrogen, and it also increases, as a result, your risk of developing fibroids and endometriosis. So you have the chemicals. You have environmental racism. Essentially, a lot of different factories out here, they produce plastics and other different types of toxic chemicals. So all down the deep south in Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi, you have all these different chemical plants which produce plastics, PVC plastics. They refine oil, and those companies they dump the chemicals in the surrounding community or emit them into the air. They're not recycling them or properly disposing of them. No, that'll cost too much money. They're just going to dump in their community. So all these different chemicals that are released to the environment oftentimes mimic estrogen. So, for example, you have a factory down in town in Louisiana. It's a PVC factory, which emits high amounts of dioxins. And dioxins was actually one of the primary components of Agent Orange. Agent Orange was the pesticide that they sprayed all throughout Vietnam, which killed close to about 200,000 people. So this dioxin, which found in Agent Orange, actually causes endometriosis. So in this town, endometriosis is extremely painful. It's a really bad uterine ailment. So in this town, in this majority black town, which was founded by freed slaves, every single black woman in that country does not have a womb as a result of endometriosis, as a result of the environmental racism. So you have environmental racism. That's another means of estrogen exposure. Then you have soy. Black folks are lactose intolerant. So under the federal government's program of WIC, which is Working Infants and Children or whatever, I don't know exactly, but they give black mothers, low-income black mothers, soy infant formula, which is genetically modified and contains more than 5 birth control pills. So when you give that young developing fetus, or child rather, soy infant formula, it has almost the equivalent of 5 birth control pills in estrogen. So this not only does it cause fibroids, because you're essentially exposing the body to high amounts of excess estrogen at a very early age, but also causes early puberty as well. So that's another route that we're being exposed to high levels of estrogen, the soy infant formula. And then finally, all different chemicals. Black folks, or primarily in black communities, you have fast food restaurants, you have plastics, you have canned foods. So you don't have a lot of fresh food. You don't have a lot of, organic foods. You have a lot of food that have pesticides on it. A lot of foods are wrapped in plastic. They're in a can. And you have the whole fast food. So all the fast foods contain high levels of chemicals which mimic estrogen, particularly phthalates. It's a chemical known as phthalates. Again, phthalates are actually created by who? ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil was a creation of who? John D. Rockefeller. Phthalates also cause boys to be what? More feminine, getting into the whole eugenics movement. So fast foods contain some of the highest, it's one of the highest sources of phthalates in the market. So black folks consume very high amounts of fast food. Of course, we're consuming the sodas. The sodas are found in plastic bottles and bottled water because, the water crisis. We need more bottled water, right? We need all bottled water. Well, bottled water, all bottled water contains estrogen. So the bottled water that we're consuming contains close to about 4,000 different chemicals. And most of those chemicals that are found in bottled water contain estrogen because they are derived from petroleum. And most of the chemicals, most of these estrogen mimicking chemicals that are out here are derived from petroleum. They're derived from oil drilling. So bisphenol A is a petrochemical, phthalates is a petrochemical. There are close to about 10,000 of these synthetic chemicals that are out here now, most of which mimic estrogen and block testosterone. So, we're consuming the bottled water, because our water is toxic, has lead in it. The government, is poisoning us, not looking out for us. So we have to drink bottled water, contains estrogen. We're eating fast food, because that's what's all available in our communities. That contains estrogen. We're, consuming canned foods because there's no fresh food available. That contains estrogen. We're consuming produce, which has a lot of pesticide in it. That contains estrogen. We're consuming meat, the commercial meats, which are fed hormones. The meat, the pork, and I'm sorry, not the pork, but the beef is fed hormones. That contains estrogen. So the black community is being hyper estrogenized, okay, intentionally for disease, in order to create more disease, and also for population control reasons. So that's why so many black women have endometriosis, breast cancer, fibroids, PCOS, and a whole host of other hormonal imbalances and ailments.
Which the modern medical world is telling us the solution for is just cut it out, right? We'll just cut it off. We'll cut off your breasts, we'll cut out the uterus, and you don't need those anyway, because we don't need you doing anything with those. So that's what they're doing with that. Let's jump for a minute as we're moving away from the physical health. Let's deal with the mental health. I'm sure all of this has a strong mental impact, and a strong impact on the minds of the individuals that are going through these awful experiences and circumstances. But what is the industry doing actually? What is the pharmaceutical and what is the medical industry doing actually to spawn mental illness? And and even I guess the food industry, the food colors or what have you. Go ahead, jump on that for us. We got about 10 minutes, so we want to wrap it up. But go ahead, let's hear what you have to say on that.
Yeah. So number one, I mentioned earlier that sugar causes dementia, so and wheat actually causes schizophrenia. So make sure it causes schizophrenia, and that's something that's known for a long time. A lot of people who have mental illness, they really just have a very severe wheat allergy, or just the wheat itself just causes schizophrenia. So if they cut out the wheat, they'll actually be more mentally healthy. So the food industry is definitely linked with the food colorings, all different preservatives and poisons that they put in food, the trans fats, the wheat and the sugar. They definitely cause mental illness. But the biggest way that the medical mafia causes mental illness is via psychiatry. Now, psychiatry, what people should know about that is that it's a pseudoscience. It's not based upon anything. You go to a doctor and he tells you have bipolar disorder. There's no diagnostic test that says you have bipolar disorder. There's none. You could just have, wheat intolerance disorder. Basically, you don't need to be eating no wheat. But the doctor ain't gonna tell you that, because Big Pharma actually sits on the boards of the wheat industry. So Big Pharma actually promotes wheat population because it produces so many diabetes patients for them and mentally ill patients for them. So, so when you go to a doctor and, he tells you have ADHD, bipolar, oppositional defiance disorder, this disorder, that disorder. There's no diagnostic test. There's no diagnostic test for it. And I'm not saying that people don't have legitimate mental illnesses and mental problems, if you will. But there is it's all cultural. So, if a person prays to an invisible man in the sky, we say he's normal, he's praying to God. But another person might say, this person is a lunatic. He's praying to somebody that's, invisible man in the sky. What are they doing? So it's all cultural. It's not based upon anything subjective, like, hey, you have high glucose, you have diabetes, or you have high blood pressure. Your blood pressure is too high, you have high blood pressure. Or, your kidneys aren't working, you have kidney disease. There's no diagnostic test to it. So psychiatry is a pseudoscience. And it's a racist pseudoscience because back in the early 1970s, blacks, for example, who wanted to escape the brutality and the terrorism and tyranny of slavery, who wanted to escape being tortured and being brutalized and being treated worse than animals and being whipped and being raped and having their heritage and culture stolen from them. and being killed and lynched. People who wanted to escape that. Psychiatrists came along and said, you have a disease known as drapetomania. And the way to cure the disease is through vigorous whippings. That's what psychiatrists said. So now a psychiatrist come along and say, okay, well, black boys, who are being dumbed down in school by the Rockefellers, as you mentioned earlier, Dr. Baruch, black boys who are being dumbed down in school, who teachers don't give a damn about them, teachers are sending them to detention, who are just completely bored because learning about George Washington was their savior and the liberator and this, that, and the third. Those boys who don't want to pay attention to nonsense that they're getting in school, they have ADHD. Even furthermore, they need a really toxic drug known as Ritalin, which is legal methamphetamine. It's legal crystal meth. They need a drug which is going to make them docile, and it's going to shrink their brains. So the psychiatrists, again, they have a history of racism. It's been used by racist regimes such as the Nazis and other regimes all throughout the world to stigmatize, target, and to stigmatize and target certain groups. So, again, if you are a person who is against oppression, they would label you as having oppositional defiance disorder. You are against being lynched in white supremacy. So you have a disorder, sir. You need to go to this mental health hospital, and we're going to cut out your brain. Because a long time ago, that's what psychiatrists used to do to black boys. Black boys who were misbehaving, in school, whatever that meant, because we all know that's very relative, they would cut out their brains. But now what they do, they don't cut out their brains anymore because, of course, there'll be outrage over this. They just give them a drug which destroys their brains and shrinks the brains. So they give them Ritalin, crystal meth. They give them psychiatric drugs such as antidepressants. And all these drugs actually make you suicidal, make you homicidal. They shrink your brain. And many people who are on these drugs go on to commit mass murders. So then the government comes along and says, hey, we need more police in black communities. Look at all these thugs around here, committing all these homicides and beating women, doing this, that, and the third. When the link between, the rates of, when the real issue is all these psychiatric drugs and the industry of psychiatry in the first place. Psychiatrists are actually still trying to push electroshock, which essentially when you put like a contraption around your brain to electrocute you. And supposedly that's supposed to help you cure mental illness, which makes absolutely no sense. What person would stick their finger into an electrical socket to cure themselves of a mental illness, or when they're feeling mentally imbalanced, or have anxiety disorder? They might have anxiety, or might have a panic attack or anxiety attack. What person does that? But that's what Big Pharma is telling us to do. And what psychiatry is telling us to do is to take these psychiatric drugs, which actually cause mental illness, cause us to be psychopaths, cause us to be violent, cause us to be homicidal, cause us to be delusional. They encourage us to take these drugs to supposedly cure our mental illness and to get electroshock therapy to supposedly cure ourselves of mental illness. But that's not the point here. The point is actually to create the very problem which they're looking to sell. Essentially, whenever how Big Pharma works is that they create the problem that they're looking to profit from. Yep. So Big Pharma wants to profit from mental illness, so they sell a drug which causes mental illness. And then when the mentally ill people come out and commit these horrible atrocities, like in the Sandy Hook disaster, the Columbine disaster, and all these other mass shootings that continue to happen all throughout the country, then they say, oh, we need more mental health. We need more mental health. These folks are crazy, they need more mental health, i.e. we need more psychiatry. We need more psychiatric drugs. So the cycle goes on and on and on. So that's what's doing to our mental health. So these psychiatrists, they're out to destroy our mental health. They're not here to help us. Just like during the slave days, they said, we had a mental illness. We wanted to escape slavery. They're still telling us today, because we still slave in this country today. They're still telling us that if you don't pay attention in school, if you don't obey authority, meaning your slave master, then you have a mental illness, and we're going to drug you. And oftentimes we will drug you against your will by putting you in a psychiatric ward.
Brother Curtis, let's now give our people who are the viewing audience an opportunity to hear two things. One, why is this being targeted in our community? And two, what do we have to do in response to this? I know we don't have but a minute of time for you to answer all of that, and I know you get thorough answers, but be mindful of the time. Why us, And what do we need to do?
Why us? Racism, white supremacy. The eugenics movement, they essentially want to increase the amount of blacks throughout the globe in order so they can better effectively steal our resources, particularly in countries like Haiti and Africa. So, this is a matter of national security. It's a matter of imperialism. So less people are around to fight, the better the U.S. empire can steal resources. And what we must do, we must continue to educate ourselves. We must oppose all vaccine mandates. So, we can't be dealing with vaccines anymore. If you're worried about your immune system and being healthy, take vitamin D, cut out wheat, cut out sugar, cut out processed foods, cut out fast foods, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat more omega-3 fatty acids, which, stimulate your immune system. Get more sunlight. The sun is our savior. We've known this for a long time. It even states that in ancient texts. And we must actually affirm and stand up for ourselves, stand up for our rights of our children, get those religious and philosophical exemptions to vaccines, avoid doctors, unless you're dealing with naturopaths like Dr. Baruch here, avoid all MDs, they're legalized drug dealers, avoid the hospital unless you've been shot or you've been in a car accident, and cut out all those carbohydrates, cut out the potato chips and the dairy and the commercial meats, opt for organic meats. I recommend a paleo diet. It's really good in terms of what to eat, and just meditate, walk in nature, spend time with family, and that's what we must do. But we have to stand up for ourselves. It's the biggest thing because these vaccines aren't mandatory, these hospitals aren't mandatory, these drugs aren't mandatory. So we need to stop buying into the propaganda and stop obeying authority because these authorities are killing us and sterilizing us, not here to help us.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Listening to Brother Curtis Duncan here on the Baruch Show, and we are coming to the end of this program. What I want to do is give our audience an opportunity to find you. How do we find you, Brother Curtis?
Yes. My email address is dr.curtisduncan@gmail.com. That's dr.curtisduncan@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/drcurtisduncan. You can also friend request me on Facebook. My name is Curtis Duncan. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. My website is www.drcurtisduncan.com. That's drcurtisduncan.com. That's drcurtisduncan.com. And just as a comment, I'm not a real doctor. People just gave me the name doctor because doctor means teacher. In Latin, that's the initial word for it. It means teacher. And I knew a lot about health, so people kind of gave me that nickname, so I kind of attached it. But I'm not a real MD or naturopath, so just to prevent any confusion. But again, my website is drcurtisduncan.com. Email address is dr.curtisduncan@gmail.com.
All right, great. You've been listening to Brother Curtis Duncan, and he's been sharing with us wisdom and insight with regard to what we're going to need to do in order to preserve ourselves on this planet. There is a campaign that we're not knowledgeable of, and many of us don't even want to give thought and give energy to the fact that somebody's really working to erase us from the planet. And the information that we've been given today is that which would give us the capacity to begin to protect ourselves and abort this otherwise successful. And we say it's successful just because we see the number of us that are sick, the number of us that are dead, the number of us that have issues, health issues, psychological issues, gender issues, mental issues, the list goes on. Again, we want to thank Brother Curtis Duncan for coming on board with us, and we look forward to having you back on as our audience is indeed appreciative of the information that you've shared, and we look forward to having you back on for part 2 so we can continue a series of information that has to be downloaded into the brains of our people so that we can have a better understanding of what we have to do to survive. Because in order to survive, we've got to change, but in order to change, we have to survive. Brother Curtis, thank you very much for coming on board with us. And we're going to be back here in the eLife Media studio in just a couple of minutes with the Urban Voices Show with Brother Hamil Harris. So you all stay tuned. This has been the Dr. Baruch Show here on the eLife Media Network. Next is the Urban Voices Show. You all stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It was all the phone sensibilities and everything you fuck could be. The most original musician really got to spell on me, you see, and set me free. I still clearly remember the way that he did I love me. How could this be? When I first heard heavy weather, I said I never heard quite a sound like Teen Town. Stars sure can get around, and so too. It is true. When I heard a grateful difference, it made me crazy. I told everyone, get in my face. Get out of here. Don't even try. That isn't a bait. If it is, then I guess you just took it to another place. Then one day, my sergeant had his news spread around like a fire. Taco went to the wire. Do it. Oh, such a musician you must admire. And I say this because everybody should know who he was. Time to go now. Do you know how to find good Jocko was? Fine to me was white to speak of. Now that I'm through, guess I told you, and I sing this song with